Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. Our goal is not only to share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon in conversation about what we're learning and what God is doing in our lives and in our community. This conversation is inspired by our 2023 sermon series for Lent, 7 Deadly Sins, the power of God to move us from death to new life. You can find more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. Don't mind my noisy children or dogs in the background of this podcast.
Is that a disclaimer?
Mm-hmm.
We just got back from a lovely hike with our youth since they had off school for President's Day. Scott, you want to tell them what you did on that hike?
I did a rope swing that I should not have done 3 months post-shoulder surgery. Didn't hurt my shoulder, but I slid down the hill on the other side, completely in the mud.
Yeah, it was entertaining, but I was worried because I didn't have Scott sign a release form to the church for...
Don't worry, Jeremy. I'm not going to sue you or the church for my muddy jeans.
Yeah. No, we had a lovely time. We had a little devotional ran by our very own Elizabeth Boswell, which was a nice little break surrounded by God's creation. And we were very much away from the world. You couldn't see, you could hear a highway, but you couldn't see the highway. You couldn't see suburbia around the park. And it was nice to get away because if we were back in civilization, we are constantly surrounded by advertisements for things on the roads, on our TVs, on our phones, whatever it may be. It's just a constant bombardment. And you were talking about commercials on Sunday, and I was curious, have you ever watched a commercial and immediately fallen for it and purchased what they were selling?
I'm going to say no, but I don't trust myself on that
Tell
memory.
me, you never once in college saw a Pizza Hut commercial and then they were like, oh, we should go to Pizza Hut. And then you guys went.
Have you ever been to Wilmore, Kentucky?
Okay, have you ever watched the Farmer's Almanac channel and we should go cow tipping?
No.
What do they have in Kentucky?
In Wilmore?
Yeah.
As far as restaurants?
Restaurants or TV? Is it all local restaurants on commercials?
I don't know.
Sonny's Barbecue or whatever?
I mean, some. In Wilmore itself, when I was there, we had a little local coffee shop that was only open till 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Called Hebrews?
No, Solomon's Porch.
Okay.
Solomon's Porch. Across the street from that was a Subway. And then, I think either my junior or senior year, a Chinese restaurant came into town.
Oh, wow. That became the spot.
That was it. If it wasn't going to be one of those, you had to actually drive to the next town over, which was Nicholasville, or to Lexington.
Which, speaking of Wilmore, I just saw the update that on Saturday, 15,000 people were trying to attend the revival, and
15,000 people from outside of Wilmore.
Yeah. Which I think is more than the population of Wilmore.
Oh, yeah. The population's only somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000.
Yeah.
When school's in session.
Wow. And so the 15,000 people, they ended up blocking off the town, and only residents were able to continue to get in.
Yeah, they had to ask the state police to come in and kind of help navigate that a little bit.
Just mind-blowing. No, that's amazing.
But you know what that shows me?
They need to expand Wilmore?
Well, they need to expand Wilmore, sure. But it's not... we're always looking for what's that next thing, that next trend, that next killer song or lighting setup or whatever that's going to attract people into our churches. But these are people who are showing up just because they've heard that God is there.
Yeah.
And they want to experience God's presence. Mm-hmm. And so while it can be really tempting to be envious of, some of the big mega churches in the country or even some of the ones here in our own area and say oh man, they're doing it. They've got the big light shows. They've got the big projection screens. Their bands sound like they're professionals. They've got these 800 or 1,000 seat auditoriums that they're packing out. We've got to do what they're doing if we want to attract people, young people in particular.
Yeah.
But I think what the outpouring or the awakening, the revival, whatever you want to call it at Asbury shows is if God is really there, people will show up.
Yeah. And that's the thing is when it like started and continued after the service, it was more just like prayer and testimony focused. And that's what continued it. So it's not, you know, a lot of the parts of our Sunday morning worship wasn't even the part that continued and drew more people. And so when we think that, oh, well, I don't know if I want to just sit in the room and pray and hear people's testimonies, that's what, you know, continued this to push and move into what it was. And again, it's the beautiful part of our class meetings that we're going to be starting very soon is that we'll be praying together and we'll be sharing testimony of how God is working in our lives through the week. And so I'm excited to see a little bit of what we've been hearing about reflected in our small groups and in our congregation this Lenten season. You weren't expecting that kind of a transition, were you?
Nope. Where are we going now?
Wilmore, Kentucky. Man, I just want to get Sonny's barbecue and camp out in the Hallahan's yard. That's really...
They'd probably let you.
Was my dream. Yeah, because I was like, I don't want to make them have to clean the house or do anything. Like, I just need access to a bathroom and have a tent in the yard. I'll use my electric skateboard to get to the chapel so I don't have to worry about all the traffic of people coming.
I mean, the line of people at this point probably stretches to their house.
That's baffling. Absolutely baffling.
Yeah. And the great thing is, because I'm part of that extended Asbury world, I saw a friend of a friend's post, which said that Zach, the guy who preached the chapel, that this all kind of launched from, texted his wife right after he got off the stage, said, "That was my latest stinker. I'll be home soon."
Wow.
Like, he felt coming down off the stage after that chapel service that he'd flopped, whiffed.
Wow.
And that's where God showed up.
Man, so I should mess up more often.
I mean, it gives me great hope because I feel like that's, you know, half my Sundays, at least. Every Sunday there's something I feel like, oh, I should have said that better, or I didn't handle that well, or I probably wasn't as clear as I need to be, you know, explaining that concept or inviting people to respond in some way. And it's just such a good reminder that
it's not all on us.
It's not at all on us. Like, yes, we have to be faithful. Yes, we have to show up where God has asked us to show up. But we've got to trust that He's the one who's doing the work.
Yeah.
And if we're not doing that, if we're trying to do it on our own, that's when it's going to fail.
Yeah. No, amen. Well, I was thinking if I did go, that what if I, like, didn't start going to the chapel until, like, 3 a.m.?
Now, because it's gotten so big and they're trying to protect it for the students, they're putting, like, boundaries on when people can come in.
Yeah. Now,
so you're over 25, so you wouldn't be allowed in at 3 a.m.
Yeah. And even if this was 10 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to get in, Scott.
That's true. That's true. Try and protect it for the young people.
The audacity. The audacity. Yeah, but then they're going to open it up in other facilities.
Yeah, they're looking for some other locations to transfer the majority of it.
Yeah, which is amazing. So I'm excited to see how this outpouring, as I believe that's what the school is starting to title it as, is how that outpours into the regular life and outside of that building and into the country and into the streets and to the people that aren't going to Wilmore, Kentucky, and see how God is going to use this as a stepping stone or a launch pad for what He is doing specifically there.
So all that to say, I can't remember a time I've ever watched a commercial and gone out and bought something.
I can name too many times, especially food. Usually once I started having my own money, and then I saw something, I was like, yeah, that's like 5-10 minutes away. I was going to have that. So, or it'll make me think of another restaurant that I want to go to. But even just like Facebook ads or Instagram ads, there's always things like, because it's catered specifically to you. And so they'd usually get me on, especially the things where it's a subscription model, and you get the first one for free, but you just pay shipping.
Yeah.
And then you have to remember to cancel. Oh, I've done easily 3-4 dozen of those.
Yeah.
Gets me hook, line, and sinker almost every single time.
I'm always afraid to do those because there have been a couple times I've forgotten to cancel before the subscription kicks in.
I set it on my calendar so that my phone reminds me the day of. Speaking of Kentucky, we were talking about being envious sometimes of other people, of not just the resources that they have, but also sometimes, for example, the services happening in Wilmore and wishing that for our services. But also I was curious if you've ever been envious about someone's spiritual gifts or a spiritual experience they had.
I mean, I think as a pastor, there's always the temptation to envy those who we see to be either better preachers or who are, preaching to larger crowds or something like that. Where, I mean, it's never really been my desire to lead a huge, giant megachurch or anything like that. But there's still something within me that says, if they exist, they must be the standard for success. And I don't actually believe that to be true, but it's tempting to go there. It's tempting to think that, and to think that then if we've got, 100 people or 150 people showing up, that somehow we need to do whatever we need to do to program for growing to that kind of a size. Where I actually think God most often uses churches, down through history, he's used churches where they're small enough, close enough to each other that the pastor actually knows the people. I saw on Twitter the other day, someone was posting, they're like, I visited this little local church, about 100 people, and the second time I went back, the pastor knew my name. So coming from a mega church, like, that was just kind of almost creepy to me, like to actually know the pastor. I'm like, but isn't that how it should be? That's what, I mean, but the temptation's there. Yeah. To look at those and to see, and to want to have that kind of success, or to hear a preacher preaching on a podcast or a live stream or something and be like, wow, I wish I could preach like that pastor. Even though it might just be a one-off sermon you're hearing that, you don't have the context of all those other sermons where it's okay or mediocre or good but not great. And
yeah, I think for me, it's finding the balance of where admiration turns into envy. Because, there's so many people, John Oswald, Craig Keener, N.T. Wright, like all of these, in my mind, like geniuses, like the amount of knowledge they have of scripture, the research they've done about the scriptures, like all of these things just is like mind-boggling to me. And so because I admire them, it's like, oh man, how much like more, in my mind, fruitful could I be if I had what they had, and then reminding myself of like, well, that's not exactly who God's called me to be. And luckily he's provided those people and their resources that they've created to help me understand more and save me the thousands of hours that Craig Keener put into everything he's done.
Yeah, and that's where showing up and being faithful to be where God's called you to be is so important. Yeah. It's not about trying to be someone else in the context you're in. It's about being faithful to what God's asked you to do.
Yeah. And like the gifts, I mean, even within our own church, Aaron Adriano, who leads our contemporary worship service, I always say the term I use is disgustingly talented, where he's just, his brain musically is on another level. Yeah. And so like we left young adults just the other night, and there's that piano upstairs on the way to the youth room, and he just like wanted to check out the tuning, so he just like hits a couple keys and he goes, huh, and then just breaks into Flight of the Bumblebees. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, just off the top of his head, right?
Off the top of his head, no music, no nothing, just it's like, and even on an out-of-tune piano, it sounds amazing. It's like, man, and then you get the little Emmy. It goes from admiration to like, man, I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
Like, not even like for other people in glory. Like, if I could just entertain myself by being able to fly on the keys like that, gosh, where I'm just over here, I know middle C.
Yeah.
That's about the extent.
Can plunk out Mary Had a Little Lamb, or
I'm
Jesus
not even
Loves
there.
Me.
I wish I'll work on that. One of the things you had talked about as well in our service was the story of the landowner, and he would hire people throughout the day, but then paid them all equally, no matter how much work they put in. And I was curious if you've ever felt like you were treated unfairly at a job.
So when I was in seminary, I worked, alongside going to school to make all of that ends meet and to pay for school and that kind of stuff. And the first job I had when I was down there, we moved down to Jackson, Mississippi in July of 2006. And so shortly after that, I got a job working at Lifeway Christian bookstores. And at Lifeway, they had a very strict dress code. You had to wear your company issued shirt and a pair of khakis and some kind of closed-toed shoes, and your shoes had to match your belt,
Okay.
blah, blah, blah. And so I walked in one day wearing a pair of khaki corduroys.
Oh.
And I was told that if I broke dress code again, it would be, this was just a verbal warning, but it would be a written warning because I wore khaki corduroys instead of, flat khakis.
Yeah. Which they should have specified. That's on them.
Oh, well, that's what I thought. I didn't see anything wrong with it. I thought I still looked nice. I was still keeping within the spirit of the dress code.
Yeah, but they thought you were some rebellious hippie.
Yep, apparently. So, so that was the kind of silly example that came to my mind. But
no, mine, I felt like connected really well with the parable because I worked at McDonald's in Glassboro for too many years. And
I have a picture of it. There's proof.
Great. It's already circulated around the youth group. Everyone's seen it. If you haven't, just ask a youth kid, hey, can I see the picture of Jeremy working at McDonald's when he was in high school? And almost all of them either have it as their background or have it somewhere on their phone. Lucky me. Anyway, after working there for 2 years and you get a 10 to 20 cent raise each year, I'd worked my way up to, let's say, $8.50 an hour. And then minimum wage got boosted up in the state. And I stayed at $8.50 an hour because I think that might have been what they raised it to. I can't remember. But then all the new people were getting paid the same. And I had 2 years experience. I could work all the different stations. And these other kids were working slow and didn't know what to do half the time. I was like, how am I getting paid the same amount? Yes, we're clocking in the same hours. But I have the experience and I just got paid minimum wage. I was happy I was making more than when I started.
Sure.
But I was very discontent with that, and I can't trash talk McDonald's too much more because they have too much power. but similar things, much worse, happened to many of my coworkers.
Yeah, and stuff like that happens, right? And there are times where we feel like someone else is getting what we deserve, or that someone else is getting more than we think they deserve. And that's where it shifts into that spirit of envy rather than just coveting or desiring or something like that, where it's no, I actually don't think you deserve to get that. And that's where we might direct it at an individual. But most often we're actually angry at God, because he's not giving us what we think we deserve, or he's giving someone else what we think he should be giving us. And I think that kind of gets down to the root of envy in one of the books I was reading for this sermon series, which is called Glittering Vices. That's how they talked about the 7 deadly sins, glittering vices. They were telling the story about Mozart and this guy named Salieri, which,
Ooh.
if you've ever seen the movie Amadeus, it kind of tells the story from Salieri's perspective. He was the court musician for Emperor Joseph, Franz, or somebody. Franz
Gave him
Joseph.
that new groove.
Yeah. The emperor of the Austrian Empire. He was the court musician, and he thought he was pretty hot stuff. He thought he was pretty good. And then this young upstart Mozart comes along, and he's getting all the acclaim. He's getting all the attention. And Salieri realizes that in comparison, he's fairly mediocre. And he starts to get angry about it. He starts to envy Mozart. He starts to get angry with God about why God would allow this young kid to outdo him, and he'd worked so hard, and all of his desire was to glorify God with his music and all this stuff. And the envy gets so bad, he ends up being involved in a plot to have Mozart killed.
Wow.
And it ends up driving him insane. He ends up dying in an asylum because the envy drove him crazy.
My gosh.
But ultimately, he was angry at God.
Yeah.
And so the movie tells the story. It starts out with him in the insane asylum, and a priest comes to hear his final confession. And he tells him this whole story about his relationship with Mozart. But ultimately, it came down to he was really mad at God about what he gave someone else that he thought he deserved.
Yeah. And an illustration that really helped me gain perspective and check my own heart is in the book. Is it Jesus Outside the Lines? I think that's the one. I have multiple copies in my office if anyone wants to borrow one.
Scott Sauls, right?
Yeah. And he, in regards to greed, talks about, if we hear about someone that spent like $10,000 on a bottle of wine at a fancy, let's say in Dubai, because I know everything's expensive in Dubai, $10,000, and it's like, well, a natural reaction for many is, well, imagine what you could have done with that $10,000 instead of buy the bottle of wine. You could have bought a car, you could have helped someone get through college, you could have fed this many people, that many people, and it's all in perspective of what we would use that money for, how that, but then when you look at the fact that we are, if we're in America, then we're in like the top 3% of the world economy, something crazy like that. And so what we spend on even a fast food meal out in many places is like 5 to 10 days wages, like a week's wages. Because I think it was, I don't know, post-COVID what it is. I think it was like 50% of the world lives off of like $2-3 a day.
Oh, sure.
Something like that. And so in comparison, someone else somewhere else in the world is like, why would you go out to McDonald's and get a large fry? Do you know who you could have helped and who you could have fed with that? And so it's more of the being content with what God has provided us and not looking down on those that have less and not trying to be judges of those who have more and spend more however they choose, but to be content and good stewards of what God has given us. And I don't want to go too much further because it might lean into what I'm talking about on Wednesday. Or
what's
tonight.
happening tonight?
At our Ash Wednesday service.
Oh, right. Our Ash Wednesday service at 7 o'clock in the sanctuary.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that is an interesting dynamic, though, when we look at the world as a whole, or rather than just our American context. When we served as missionaries in Uganda, here, we would feel like pity from people. Like, oh, you're missionaries, you're raising your support, you don't have much, you don't have a house, you're not, like, all this stuff because we raised our support, and that means our salary was only, X amount of money, which to most Americans didn't seem like an acceptable amount. But then we'd go over to Uganda, and we were, like, rich. Rich.
Like personal security detail because of how rich you were.
Like, we had a vehicle. So, like, that just put us stratospherically out of reach for, most of the people we lived among.
Yeah.
And so there's always an interesting dynamic to try to balance and to navigate it well. I don't know that we always did, but we tried to.
And that's a perspective that I hope the team will gain as we send a mission team down to Mexico.
Yeah.
Where a lot of times it's the worry of the comforts of life that people are worried of losing as they go down. But a lot of the times, teams that I've taken have felt like they don't have the physical things and resources that we're used to in the States, but they have stronger relationships with God, and the people on the teams desire to have more of the community, to have more of the strong faith as the people down there. And so even though it may look like they don't have much, they have what is important. And so I'm excited for us to learn from each other as we're down there.
Well, that's our conversation for today. But that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode, or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.